Singleness.
Punishment or freedom?
That's a good question.
Let's talk about that.
So today's episode is all for our single friends out there.
I mean, for all our single friends, you've probably been in church and you've heard the church speak about singleness, and it frustrates you. Like, they say some things sometimes that might make you feel like you want to vomit, and some things that people have said in church about singleness.
Yes, and even later in the show, we are going to have a segment where we've got some questions from single people.
Single-lites.
The single-lites out there, telling us what are the worst things that they've heard in church on the topic of singleness. And even some of these things might be true, but just, what are the things that makes you want to vomit a little bit when you are single and a pastor preaches it in church? So we're going to get to that also. But let's dive right in.
So when we look at singleness, there's actually these two extremes that it goes to.
Sorry, I wanted to do that for the longest time.
Oh, my chair. Letterlijk. Thank you, Abel. Thank you, Abel. Thank you. But as I was saying, there are two extremes when it comes to this thing of singleness. There is a freedom and punishment that we see. And we see this in the way that we look at marriage. We think that because we are married now, our freedom is taken away. There's no more freedom. Or we think this thing of like, I'm punished because, I'm single. I need to be married, and that's the meaning of life. But that's not the truth.
Yeah, so those that view singleness as a punishment is usually those inside of the church, the Christians, because sometimes as Christians we tend to almost overvalue marriage. And so therefore we view singleness as a punishment because it's almost like marriage is the meaning of life. And then on the other hand, those, and this tends to be, not always, but tends to be those that are sort of outside of the faith or outside of Christianity, that love singleness because singleness is freedom and marriage is the ball and chain.
Definitely.
It's like love and marriage, love and marriage.
That's a good song. It's a good song.
Goes together like a horse and carriage. But obviously it doesn't.
It doesn't at all. So if you're leaning more to the freedom side, or you view freedom as singleness, or your singleness as freedom, you would actually have this danger, and this is it. It's when you become more and more selfish. I mean, you look at it and saying like, well, I'm single, so I can do what I want when I want, and it's all about you. And the problem with that is you start living a selfish life centered around yourself, and that is not a good place to be.
And that's where marriage can actually almost be your salvation, because it forces you to start living away from yourself. And so there is something of the we know marriage is not the meaning of life, but there is a great meaning that it
adds to our life.
That it adds to our life, and it's actually to combat selfishness.
Yes.
And then on the other side, if you view singleness as your punishment because you're missing out on marriage, which is the ultimate meaning of life, the danger for you is then sometimes passivity, because we end up in a place where we're just waiting. So we're not living our lives because we're waiting for the day we'll get married. So it's almost like we say that one day when I'm married, then my life starts. So until then, I am a lady or a guy in waiting.
Oh, don't say that.
So you're just waiting, but you're not living life, and so passivity can be a problem. And life is there to be lived now.
Right now, and you're missing out. So start living life now. Now,
maybe we should get to those questions.
I think that's a good one.
People, our single friends, they ask some questions, or they just mentioned us to try and help us, in church. So this is for all the pastors when you are preaching on dating, or even just speaking to singles. These are some of the things that might be some triggers, vomit triggers,
and this is our golden hat of questions.
That
we have gotten back again.
If you've got a question, make sure that you put the question in the comments below,
and we'll put it in the hat.
We'll either put it in the hat
below,
or if you've got a suggestion or question for another episode, because we're running out of material,
we are.
Then we will discuss your question.
Can you believe it? Me and Abel are running out of things to say.
Yes, go for it. Let's go to the golden hat of questions.
Golden hat of questions. First one is this: I don't need a boyfriend. I'm dating Jesus. Sorry, that was just a sympathy vomit.
makes many single people want to vomit. I'm dating Jesus.
I can't believe it.
But okay, is it wrong? Because it sounds like a very spiritual thing to say. Okay, so I mean, it's like, so when someone says, I don't need a boyfriend or I don't need a girlfriend because I'm dating Jesus, essentially what they're saying is that God is fulfilling all of my desires.
And that's
so
good.
I'm fulfilled. I'm content. So I suppose there's truth to that, but maybe...
But it's not the full truth. I mean, there are some things that God, there's desires in our hearts, and then God fulfills our desires, and that's true. He makes us whole. But there are some physical things on earth that we still need. I mean, there's still things, but here's the thing is that we still need a wife. Like, I still needed a wife because it fulfills things in my heart, desires in my heart, but I know it is from God.
Yes,
so it's still from
God.
God
is still ultimately fulfilling our desires,
needs.
but sometimes He doesn't fulfill it with Himself.
He does
sometimes God gives Himself, and that's the ultimate fulfillment. That's the deepest desires that that nothing in this world can fulfill is the desire that God can fulfill. But my desire for water that is in a coffee cup, just because so the show looks cool because we've got coffee cups, but it's actually water. Anyways, so that desire, if you are thirsty, God fulfills it by giving you water. And in the same way as we've got a desire for food, God is the one fulfilling our desire for food with food.
Yes.
And in the same way, you and I, we've got a desire for a wife, or a woman would have a desire for a husband. Then God fulfills that desire, but He does it through another person. He gives you a wife or a husband. So I think it is okay to say that God's not going to fulfill all our desires in that sense that I'm dating Jesus. If that makes sense. Yeah. So that's not a great thing to actually say in church. Next one that people don't like to hear in church. Maybe you have the gift of singleness. Oof. Have you ever heard that sermon?
Yes, you preached it. Actually.
I have.
I remember this.
Just to explain where it comes from. So it's a 1 or 2 Corinthians 7?
1 Corinthians 7.
One of the Corinthians 7?
Yes, 1 Corinthians 7.
It's like one of the Corinthians
1 of the
7.
Corinthians.
It is written.
Chapter 7, verse 7 actually.
Oh, is it? Yeah. But Paul is basically explaining that some people have got the gift of singleness. And he's actually saying, I think it's better to be single because then you can live out your calling in a certain way. So there's this thing that maybe a very small percentage, most people that we've met have got a desire for a husband or wife, but some people might have the gift of singleness.
Yeah, and I remember this actually. Abel preached about it a year or two ago, and he was busy preaching, and he actually said, well, some of us are called to singleness. And I remember sitting in the crowd and actually sitting there thinking, well, maybe that's me. Maybe God has called me to singleness. And I remember I sat there and I prayed, and I'm like, Lord, did you call me to say single? I was just submitting my heart, and in a moment it was like God answered me, and I just went, yeah, no, I'm not built for singleness. And in that moment I knew that I was called to be with someone.
No, so true. I think from a young age I also just knew that I've got this desire that I was actually praying the prayer, please God, don't give me that gift. I know you're a generous God, but please don't be that generous. Give me the other gifts, maybe just not that gift. But I think let's not make little of scripture. I think what Paul is trying to say makes so much sense. I think what he is saying is that there are certain things. It is a gift. It's not for everyone. So it's not everyone that can live that life. So some people are gifted that they can live a life of singleness, and he's very positive about it because that's the life that he actually lived. And I think he's also very it just makes so much sense that there are so many things that you can do as a single person that you cannot do if you are married and you've got children.
Just practically and time-wise.
Yes,
because you got 3 kids right now.
I do.
And I mean, I've seen you, man. You're constantly tired and just working hard. But there are certain, obviously, the limitations because of that. But the limitations I choose because I've got the responsibility of a wife and kids. Exactly. But I can't just decide, okay, tomorrow I'm going on a mission trip to Japan or wherever. There are certain realities to my life now. Well, I suppose they can come with me. Anyways, let's go to the next one. Okay, here we go. Next question is, be patient. God's timing is not your timing.
That's also a tough one. It's very true.
Yeah, very true.
But it's not something that a single person always wants to hear.
Exactly. It's kind of like that thing of I'm a lady in waiting,
Yeah, lady in waiting. I think there was a book like that some years ago. Lady in waiting.
And the guy's I'm waiting for my wife. I'm just waiting for God to bring this wife on this pedestal in front of me.
It's going to come. Yeah. And like, this is your wife.
Here, look here. Yeah. I mean, that's so true. And I think the problem with that is that if we have that, looking at it in that way, we're living a life passive.
Yes.
Waiting is
we're living a life of waiting.
You're just sitting there doing nothing, being passive in your life, in your singleness. Yes. And the scary thing of that, you're missing out on life at this moment. Amen. You're missing out on the adventure God has for you with Him. You're missing out on that. And the problem with that is that we think that there is a biblical type of waiting that we actually read about, a way that we can wait upon the Lord. And waiting upon the Lord is not passive, but it's actually proactive.
So actually in Hebrews it speaks about patiently, like waiting for the promises of God, and that patience is not speaking about being passive. We think patience means passivity.
Not at all.
Patience means I keep on knocking, I keep on going until God opens the door. And so, I mean, that's 100% true, that statement that sometimes your timing is not God's timing. That is the truth. But it should never leave us to a place where we are totally passive and we are waiting. And with passivity, we're not necessarily speaking about, just go on a million dates, don't be passive. What we mean is you don't wait to start living your life. You are actively busy pursuing the calling that God has over your life right now. You're busy living the adventure that God has for you now already. And then when you get married, they join you in the adventure.
And in that, we so easily become passive with our relationship with God. Because we think when we get married or when we find that person, then our relationship with God is going to be epic. We're waiting in that passivity. And it's not. It's going to be epic now. And when you live that life now, when you find that person, it'll just be so fulfilled.
Okay, so it's the argument around Jesus and Paul was single, so what's the problem?
Oh, good for them.
Yeah.
Good for you being single. That's not for me, man. I don't know. I don't know about you.
But isn't that just a question?
Yeah, just a question.
Isn't that like, aren't you then saying you don't want to be like Jesus?
Hold up now. you misread this thing right now. I want to be like Jesus, but I think when it comes to the singleness part, that is probably not a desire.
He doesn't want to be like Jesus.
I want to more be like Adam, be fruitful and multiply. That's the one thing.
I mean, we want to be like Jesus in the sense that we put the will of the Father above anything else. But I think the reality is that even for Jesus but also for Paul, and he argues it in one of the Corinthians 7. And I think that's an encouragement to single people, that there are certain things that you can do as a single person that you cannot do as a married person. Not saying that therefore you should not have a desire. That's not the point. If you've got a desire for a husband or a wife at this moment, that's fine. That pain is actually just a reality. But I think what the encouragement is while you are not married yet, in that time, don't be passive. There are certain things that you can do that you won't be able to do at a later stage. And that comes down to work. I mean, there's... I know sometimes, usually a bit older, when you get older, you actually fall in love with your work. And there's so much work that you can get done when you are younger and not married yet. And not only that, just the adventure. You can travel and see the world a little bit in a greater way than what you can do once you have kids and married. Because
I'm thinking about when you get married, when you're busy with kids and everything, your time really runs thin. And even spending time with God gets difficult. But I mean, in your singleness, there is ample amounts of time to spend time with God. And this is a time where you can build that foundation massively.
So go for it. Enjoy the time that you have now. Maybe before we start wrapping up, let's quickly speak about this, the desire. I mean, so if a single person obviously watching this, I'm willing to bet that you've got a desire for a husband or for a wife. What do we do with that? I think sometimes the problem is when it comes to the desires that in church, we almost don't acknowledge that it's painful. It's like, no, just get over it. It's Jesus and Paul were single, so
Jesus and Paul were single, and so Jesus loves you. So I mean, that's all you need.
Or just go on the adventure now, and we think that all of a sudden the desire will be gone. And that's not the reality.
Not at all. Not at all. And I mean, the same desire was in Adam as well.
Yes.
I mean, we see God in the garden with Adam, and I mean, at this moment, Adam is like living a perfect life. He's living
like
with
in the
God,
presence of God.
Constantly. No sin. Everything's amazing. Got food, ample amounts. Life's great. And God still looks at him and says, "It's not good that you're alone." It's crazy that he was in the full presence of God, but he still desired something. He still needed something.
Something was still missing.
And that was Eve. And thank the Lord for Eve. But I mean, that is a thing. If we look at this and we say, you know what, there is a desire, there is something to still be fulfilled. That is a beautiful picture that God gives us of that.
Yeah, the point is actually there's nothing wrong. So if you've got this, I want to call it pain, like there's the painful desire of almost not necessarily loneliness, because there's friendships also that can meet that desire, but yeah, the loneliness, this desire for a husband or for a wife.
Yes.
It is painful, and I think it's good in church circles that we start acknowledging the pain. I think the point, however, is that while you are in your season of pain, or whatever it is, without overvaluing marriage, thinking it's the meaning of life, but in that season, even if you have a desire, it shouldn't, the pain shouldn't make you passive. Or the pain shouldn't paralyze you. I asked that for a tweet.
Yeah.
The pain shouldn't paralyze you.
Come on.
That's the point. In that season, so while Adam was waiting, God gave him a job.
Yeah.
He was keeping the garden. He named all of the animals. That took him a while. It wasn't an afternoon, it was a long time it took him. And so there were still lots of things that God was actually doing with him in that season before the season actually came.
And I want to say the danger with this thing, and I think that's a danger when it also just comes to singleness, is that we usually try and wish the season away. You know, we sit and we think, I have this pain right now, and I want to have that wife one day, and you wish, and you kind of live out of your season. But when you always look back, and then, like even with high school, you know, you used to, like in primary school, all you wanted to do was be in high school. And when you're in high school, all you wanted to be is first year. And then when you're working, all you want to do is retire. And when you're retired, you just want to work again. You're like, this is life.
You're never in season.
And this thing is, you never want to be in your season. But if you embrace your season in singleness, you embrace this calling that God has for you. You embrace the space.
The pain,
and the pain that you have to live through. I can promise you, the day you get married, the day you find that other person, there will be something inside of you that has been cultivated, that has made you ready to live that life till its fullest. But embrace the season. It's really helpful.
I hope you've enjoyed the time with us today.
Yes.
But we just also want to say that, like, we understand that even though we can sympathize a little bit because we used to have a season of singleness, we understand that your pain is also unique to where you are at this moment. But we do want to encourage you as to not be passive. Enjoy the season that you are in right now. Don't let the pain, paralyze you. Embrace it, acknowledge it, but also enjoy the season that God has put you in. And go on an adventure.
Make it happen. Go change the world.
So good show.
Good.
Do you think people actually subscribe?
I really hope they do subscribe, but we can speak about subscribing, and
I wonder if we speak about subscribing, and what if JD actually puts this part in the video
at the end,
and we're just busy speaking about subscribing, but then we subconsciously brainwashing people. And then they want to hit the subscribe button.
That is, let's brainwash God's people. Let's do that. That's actually what you're saying. But I mean, do you know there's another way to like kind of trick people or brainwash them? Is that usually,
tell me how to brainwash people. I want to do that.
Let me tell you.
To subscribe.
To subscribe. Is that actually, when you start chanting things in a crowd, you can actually start chanting.
You see the lights.
The lights, that's crazy.
Ghost,
But if you chant things in the crowd, the people will start chanting with you.
They'll just start doing
anything, and you can just say anything, and people will start chanting with you.
Like, say if we do subscribe.
Subscribe. Subscribe. Subscribe. Subscribe. Subscribe. Subscribe. Subscribe. Subscribe. Subscribe. Subscribe. Subscribe. Subscribe. Subscribe.